What is up? Welcome back to Literally Nothing But Everything podcast with Mike Rispoli. I hope you had a fantastic week last week, and let's kind of just jump right into this bitch. So last week, I actually had an interesting thing happen to me. On Wednesday, I had to go to this event, and when I'm at the event, this woman and I just ended up talking. She goes, "Oh, where are you from?" I told her I'm from Greenwich, and she just goes, "Oh, so does that mean that you just come from wealth?" And I'm like, who the fuck starts a conversation off like that? Like, now I automatically just fucking can't stand you because you're automatically making an assumption about me that one isn't true, and you're also judging me based off of like the location in which I lived. Like, what if I had said that I was from Bridgeport? What would you have said about me then? Hell, even It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia made a joke about Bridgeport. I don't remember the exact episode, but I do remember that there was a clip that they had where they were like, "Oh, this is New York, this is New Jersey, this is Connecticut." And they were showing a map, and they were like, "What's that brown spot?" "Oh, that's Bridgeport. You never want to go there." So, what if I had told you that I was from Bridgeport? I can only imagine the shit that she probably would have assumed about me at that point. But now she's automatically on my bad side. Because this also isn't even the first time that this has happened to me. Now, I don't know if I've already told this story, but if I have, just bear with me. Like, I've only got so many stories here, guys. But I'm working at a bar in college, and one of the patrons on the other side of the bar that I'm pouring a drink for, she ends up having a conversation with me, and she just goes, "Oh, so where are you from?" And again, I told her I'm from Greenwich, and she just goes, "Oh, so does that mean that you come from wealth?" And I was like, bitch, if I had come from wealth, I would be on your side of the bar. Like, what? You just think I'm doing this for fucking funsies? Trust me, if I was one of those trust fund babies, I wouldn't be here. So, go fuck yourself. As a society, can we just not assume that people have or don't have money just based off of the town that they live in? I mean, I know that I live in Greenwich. I know that this is a very vastly wealthy town, but you know what? The reason why I hate telling people that I'm from Greenwich is for those reasons, because people already assume that you have wealth, which in many cases you might not think is a bad thing. I mean, for all I know, people might want to come across as being like a bad rich bitch, but that's not really how I roll. Like, I personally don't feel I fit the Greenwich stereotype because I'm not out here wearing like Ralph Lauren polo shirts or whatever the fuck, wearing like designer clothing. I'm out here just wearing jeans and a t-shirt. Like, I just casual as fuck. Kind of like Adam Sandler. You would never know that he was like the fifth richest person in Hollywood based on the way that he dresses, right? But unlike Adam Sandler, I am not wealthy. I do not come from like vast amounts of wealth. And I understand that that's what the stereotype is of somebody living in Greenwich is. But as much as you might think having wealth is such a great thing, there also comes negative stereotypes, right? And part of those negative stereotypes involve being entitled, you're greedy, you're shallow, you're materialistic, like all these negative connotations. And then there's also the sense of maybe you have to keep up with the Joneses, because having wealth also emits this idea of like generating envy for somebody else, right? Like, oh, that person's got a Cadillac, so I gotta get a Cadillac, or like whatever the fuck. Like, I don't know. It just doesn't vibe with me. I don't really care what other people have. And I also don't judge somebody based on where they're from because I don't care. The only thing I give a fuck about is if you're a decent person or not. I don't care if you come from wealth or not. And yeah, money might be able to solve all of the problems that you have. You might not necessarily need to worry about bills as much or whatever it may be. But I also don't think that people understand the negative aspects of having wealth or coming from wealth. Like, when I was in high school, I hung out with this kid who was enormously wealthy. I mean, you walked into his house, it was like a fucking castle. But something that he didn't have was a family life. And it's not that he didn't have a family. I don't really know what his mom's deal was. I can't remember. But I do know that his parents were divorced. But this kid had everything that you could have wanted. He had a like home chef, he had a maid, he had a nanny growing up, and that's also part of it. Like, if you come from wealth, I feel like a lot of people in this town, they maybe just have a kid just for the prestige aspect of having a kid, but they don't want any of the responsibility of having a kid, so they just hire a nanny. And the nanny takes more of the parental role than the actual parent does. So it's like, what are you having a kid for if you don't actually want to like parent your kid? And that's what also generates the sense of entitlement and whatever, because now all of a sudden these kids just think that they can go do whatever they want and they can act however they want without any repercussions. And I don't mean to say that about the kid that I hung out with in high school. What I meant by him not having a family life was he did everything alone. And I'm also not talking about the fact that he was just a single child or an only child, however you want to phrase it. What I mean is, like my family growing up, we all sat down at the dinner table and we had a meal together. And it was like we would have family time. Or on weekends, it was like one day we would spend together as a family and then another night we would go hang out with our friends or whatever it was. But this kid, he came over for dinner one night and it was really sad because he just started eating at the counter. He had never known that, hey, like I can sit down like with the family and eat together. So we're all sitting down at the table and he's sitting over by the counter and we're like, dude, like, are you going to come join us? And it was almost like he had this look on his face of like, oh, what the fuck? Because he never had experienced that before. And then as we started hanging out, I think he truly embraced the idea of sitting down together as a family because it was quality time that you could have with everybody. So I don't know if that's maybe just how like his life was run, but I think being in a lesser grade than him on like the wealth scale, if you want to call it that, kind of opened his eyes to a new level of living where, yeah, I could have all of this stuff, but I'm also missing out on certain things that are more important than just the material aspects of things. Like you could have the greatest house or the nicest car, but if you're not having that family aspect, that's ultimately what's really sad. And that's what ultimately also kind of makes you lonely in life, right? Like you could have your friends or whatever, but I mean, maybe it's just the fact that I'm Italian, but your family is pretty much everything, unless you just come from a shitty family. And there are maybe reasons as to why you excluded yourself due to toxicity reasons, which is totally fair too. I mean, everybody's life is different, but at the end of the day, there's nobody else that you can rely on more than your family. And that's something that that kid never was able to experience, which I always thought was kind of sad. And it was also something that made me realize that, yeah, wealth has its advantages, but it also truly does have its disadvantages. So I don't know. All I'm saying is, like, I find it incredibly rude, especially, like, being in this fucking town. Like, I get judged based on where I also live in this town. Like, if you don't come from an incredibly wealthy area within the town, oh, and you might think, oh, all of Greenwich is just wealthy. No, not necessarily. There are less wealthy areas in the town, right? So if you don't come from a very wealthy area of town, people in that area will then judge you if you don't come from the wealthier area of town. So for me, it's kind of like I live in this damned if you do, damned if you don't situation where I tell somebody in town where I live and I get judged because I'm not quote unquote keeping up with their Joneses. But then I tell somebody from the outside world of Greenwich that I live in this town, and they just assume that I come from vast amounts of money, and then they probably just prejudge me and just think I'm a trust fund baby, I grew up with a nanny, all that shit. And it's like, that's not the case. So how about, as I said already, we just don't assume what people's lives are like right off the cuff of meeting someone, that people come from or don't come from money. Like, I don't know. I always thought that as a society, it was rude to judge somebody based off of that stuff. But this has now become a multifaceted thing in my life. And I'm just like, do people just not have the couth that I thought that they had? I don't know. But what else happened this week? Oh, I ended up working at the bar over the weekend. And it was actually kind of slow. I only worked on Friday. And I mean, it was busy, but it wasn't like we got absolutely slammed like we normally did. So I don't know if all these like rich kids ended up going to their houses on the Cape. Look at me also doing the whole stereotyping thing. But I'm also going based off of like what they tell me. Like I know that these kids all have houses on the Cape and they spend weekends away, so I don't know. But one thing I definitely got to do better at is learning these people's names who come into the bar, because they all know who I am, but I have no idea who they are. I mean, there were some people who came in I never knew, I don't even recognize, and they're just like, "Oh, hey, Mike," and I'm just like, "Oh, hey, it's you." Like I don't fucking know who you are, but I'm glad that I'm at least memorable. But something else I learned that I got to do is I definitely have to learn how to dance because the bar was ended up being kind of dead, and some of the girls were asking me to dance with them. But like I said, I don't know if it was last week or a couple weeks ago, where I'm just like I just feel so uncomfortable dancing, and I'm like I really got to learn how to do this. So what are some typical like non just white guy dance moves that you could see in a bar? Because I just don't feel comfortable doing it. I think a lot of it is the fact that I'm just like way too stiff. I don't know if it's the fact that I just got to incorporate more stretching into my workout routine or what, but my hips are fucking gone. And all the movement from what I know in dancing all comes from the hips. But one thing's for damn sure is nobody's gonna fucking find me twerking up against a wall. That's for damn sure. But I definitely think I need to learn how to dance or something because that would have actually made the night a little bit more enjoyable on my part because I'm also sitting there like, can somebody just start something so I have something to do? But it was a quiet night. But with that said, I still had to throw out a couple people. And it wasn't like I threw them out, I just denied them. Like one kid came in, he showed me a California license. First question, what's your zip code? All of a sudden, the girl he was with just started dying of laughter. So I'm like, okay, this is clearly a fake because if she's already laughing, that's an indication that he is not going to know how to answer this. So I'm just like, dude, just leave. And then one kid was like, oh, I totally forgot my ID, but I have a picture of it. I'm like, dude, I can't fucking help you there. Like, a picture could be anything. You could fucking use Photoshop for all I know. I'm not fucking dealing with that. And he's like, well, I come in here all the time. I'm like, well, you're not memorable enough for me to remember you, so you're kind of SOL. And then he just started giving me shit. And the line that I always love to use that always ends up like working is either get out or I'm throwing you out and you're not going to want the latter. And that line works without fail. But yeah, nothing too crazy going on. I mean, nothing's crazier than Biden shitting himself. I know last week I got like really political on this thing, and I really try not to be super political on this thing. I mean, last week I went a little overboard with it, I think, but I really kind of don't want to veer too much into the political realm of things just because I know how alienating that can be. And it's also really hard to not showcase your own biases, and that's another way of alienating people. But I gotta talk about Biden shitting himself. I mean, how is it that I don't care what your political affiliation is, but how is it that you see the President of the United States shitting his pants on stage in front of pretty much the whole world, and people still think that this guy is physically fit for the job? I mean, if I shit my pants at work, I would send my resignation letter so fucking fast, it's not even funny. Because number one, you're going to be known as the pants shitter. And number two, just the sheer embarrassment of it alone would make me never want to fucking step foot in that building ever again. But I will say what it did make me come up with is a new segment that I want to introduce is who are people in the public eye that you think should hang up their cleats because they're just too old to keep doing what they're doing. Even though I will say, Biden is someone who definitely needs to hang it up. And that's politics aside. I mean, the dude is so fucking old. I mean, talk about a guy who should just be enjoying retirement. Instead, he's out here airstriking his own pants. And honestly, that goes for Trump too. Didn't Trump, like, fart in a meeting? Like, if you can't fucking control your bowels, you can't fucking control the country. Can that be a fucking rule here? But okay, all politics aside, I came up with a few other fun examples here. A lot of them tend to be 80s musicians just because I love that type of music and it's what I like know the most. But also I came up with ideas on who could replace those people. So a couple weeks ago I mentioned Vince Neil having to hang up his cleats because he just cannot perform anymore. He's just out of shape and he can't even fucking sing. So somebody who I actually think would be a good replacement for Vince Neil from Motley Crue is Miley Cyrus. Which you might think is a weird take, but I've seen videos of her playing rock covers, and she can actually do a pretty good job with it. I mean, the first video that's probably going to pop up if you put it up on YouTube, Miley Cyrus rock covers, is her version of Black Dog, which I think she kind of butchered. But that's also just because Led Zeppelin is really hard to cover in general, so you got to give her the benefit of the doubt there. But I saw her doing a duet with Billy Idol. And I think the duet was done back in 2016 for the iHeartRadio Festival or something. And she absolutely killed it. Now, the other thing I got to make note of is that I truly got to give credit where credit is due. Billy Idol is still in fantastic shape. I mean, if he's still in the same shape that he was back in 2016, the dude's got a harder six-pack than I do. So that's saying something. But going back to Miley Cyrus, she also put out a cover of Nothing Else Matters by Metallica, and it's actually a fantastic cover. The only issue I have with the song in itself is just the fact that at the end, where James Hetfield does his solo, I think the guitarist on Miley Cyrus's version was Andrew Watt, and I think he just kind of went a little over the top with it because James Hetfield was a little bit more melodic, and Andrew Watt was like, let me see how many fucking techniques I can put into this thing. So it was just a little over the top, and it didn't necessarily fit the vibe of the song. But after hearing Miley playing with Billy Idol and her singing on that song, I think that she would be a great fit for a rock band, and I think she'd probably do a better job than Vince Neil of Motley Crue. But you probably need somebody with a higher register, so maybe Lizzie Hale from Hailstorm would be better. Oh, and then another person who I think definitely needs to hang it up is David Lee Roth. I mean, the last time that Van Halen even toured was in 2015. And I don't know if DLR is out here still doing stuff ever since then, but if he is, he really needs to stop. I am actually saying this as a huge Van Halen fan. I love this band, and Eddie Van Halen is actually the guy who I first heard that really made me want to play the guitar. I was just like, holy shit, what is he doing? Like, how people felt about him back in the 70s is how I felt about them 30 years later. And after seeing Van Halen play back in 2015, which also ended up being their last tour because Eddie Van Halen ended up passing away, rest his soul. And what's funny about that is my dad is also a huge Van Halen fan. So for him to bring his son to a Van Halen concert 30 years after he saw them, that was probably like kind of a like full circle moment for him. So that was kind of cool for both of us to enjoy. But at that concert, DLR didn't even know the lyrics to his own songs. There was one point in the concert where he was just like, I forgot the fucking words. We're just like, dude, you've been playing these songs how many years? You don't have that shit memorized at this point? And what made me ultimately think that he should probably hang it up is because a lot of the crowd ended up doing the work for him where they were singing most of the songs than he was. Plus, I don't know if you guys listened to the album they put out in 2012, but even the studio couldn't help him out with this sorry attempt to hit a high note. But if Wolfgang ever wanted to do a DLR era tribute, I think Michael Starr would be a fantastic choice. He's from a band called Steel Panther, and if you don't know who Steel Panther is, they're pretty much just a band that does music in the style of 80s glam metal, but they also make fun of it. Like, to put it in perspective, they have a song called Glory Hole, and literally the lyrics are blowing my load at the glory hole. So but despite that, they're actually a fucking great band. They're kind of like Limp Bizkit, where like the musicians are fantastic, but the songs themselves kind of suck. And I'm not saying that Fred Durst was a great vocalist. Like, that dude sucks. But everybody surrounding Fred Durst was an amazing musician. I mean, talk about a guy just getting carried by a supporting cast. But alright, continuing on. A third guy, and my final guy, that I think needs to hang it up is Axl Rose from Guns N' Roses. And the person who I think should easily take over for them if they want to continue touring without Axl is Carrie Underwood. Because not only is Carrie Underwood a huge fan of Guns N' Roses, I think she actually talked about this on Kimmel or Fallon, one of the Jimmys. She was on one of the late night shows, and she was talking about how she actually ditched her family to go see Guns N' Roses perform. And there's also video of Carrie Underwood doing a duet of, I think, Sweet Child of Mine and Paradise City with Axl. I have no idea what the event was for, but they ended up performing together. You can find it on YouTube, and she was so much better than he was. I mean, Axl can no longer sing a clean vocal without sounding like he's got a frog in his throat, but Carrie absolutely fucking killed it. And I gotta say, as somebody who's going to go see them, she's also way better to look at. I mean, Carrie Underwood, I don't know how old she is, but she is a fucking fox. I mean, she's gorgeous. She sings well. Like, why would they not want her to perform with them? And I know, I'm just talking all this mad shit about people who are way past their prime. But you know what? In defense of that, I feel like it's the equivalent of those people who just peaked in high school and they're just trying to relive their glory days. Like, guys, you are 70 years old. You guys can barely sing anymore. And it's not my fault that you can't sing. You guys are the ones who just totally destroyed your bodies given whatever you guys injected in it. Like, my God. I mean, there's a story about David Lee Roth when he was singing Jamie's Crying for Van Halen 1, where they wanted his voice to sound even raspier than it was, and they just couldn't get it right. So he ended up just downing like a fifth of Jack and then smoked like 2 or 3 cigarettes, went in and recorded the song. Like, that's the kind of damage that they were doing for our pleasure. And I know, I'm just giving them constant shit, and it's no wonder that they can't hold up. But guys, you gotta know when to give it a break here. But the problem is, people have no problem paying for mediocre bullshit. I mean, did the freaking Titanic submersible not prove that? And that's ultimately the problem. If there's money to be made, they're going to continuously do it. Because then the other side of this coin is you got people like me who are willingly going to go to pay for the mediocrity just to say, oh, I was able to go and see these living legends, even though they're very well past their prime. I mean, for example, I saw Leonard Skinner, but I can't even really say that I saw Leonard Skinner because half the band is dead. I saw Ozzy. Ozzy actually did very well, considering, let's be real, that guy should have been dead 30 years ago. But he actually threw on one of the better concerts that I had seen. Minus the fact that me and my friends all thought when we went to the concert that the guitar solo was a little bit too long. Like, it was about 15 minutes too long. And me and the friends who I went with, we're all looking around like, did Ozzy go take a nap or did he maybe pull a Biden and shit himself? What's going on here? But at least Ozzy now, given all of his health ailments, he now knows he's got to retire from touring. He's still going to put out music because, he can still sing, so why not? But at least he's going to retire from touring, which I think is a good thing. It's one thing if these bands want to continuously put out music, that's fine. I have no issue with that. But to watch these guys just struggle on stage, it's just really sad. And what's even worse is that's what's going to become of their ultimate legacy at the end of the day here. That's how people are going to ultimately remember you. But alright, I just gave 3 examples of artists who need to hang it up. And I also gave examples of people who I think they could also be replaced with. So if you like this segment, feel free to write in and give me examples of who you think should hang it up. Or if you don't want to see him hang it up, who do you think that they could be replaced with? And I'm not just talking about Biden and he needs to be replaced by Trump or whoever. This is not meant to showcase your political affiliation. This is literally just meant to be fun. I could give a shit about the politics of what's going on right now because it's all going to shit anyways, and I really couldn't give any less of a fuck. But I can easily come up with other artists who I think need to hang it up and who I think they could be replaced by. And I'm not just saying covers wise, I'm saying if you like their music and you want maybe the band or a tribute band to perform, who should take over for that person in that spot in the band or the group or whatever. But hopefully that's a segment that you guys can get into, because something that I absolutely love is music. You heard me talk about how much I love Van Halen, just to showcase off more of my own interests. I'm a big music nut. It's something that I was almost autistic with, because when I got so into a band, I used to just look up who they were, and I just wanted to know everything about them because I just became obsessed. But besides just being blown away by Van Halen, I was probably 7 or 8 years old when I first heard them. So that was just music that just caught me by surprise, because at that point in my life, I had never heard anything like it. And this might only be interesting to people who are into music or into rock music or whatever. But it's also a matter of fact of just appreciating where music has come from and how it's evolved. And I personally don't think that without Van Halen, you do not have modern, rock music. And it's not like you didn't have guys playing with speed before Van Halen showed up. You had guys like Chuck Berry, Jimi Hendrix, Jimmy Page, and Tony Iommi. They all play with some speed. But then all of a sudden, just Van Halen shows up. And without Van Halen, you don't have the whole 80s era of hard rock music. Because not a single band, at least from what I know, all those glam bands that became popularized in the 80s, not a single one of them did not try to emulate Van Halen. Look at all of those 80s bands that came out after Van Halen. Bands like Dokken, Lynch Mob, Rat, Poison, Motley Crue, Warrant. Every single 80s glam metal band pretty much took what Van Halen did and copied it. As insurmountable as Jimi Hendrix was, nobody in the 60s was taking what Jimi Hendrix did and trying to totally recreate what he did. Or Led Zeppelin. Nobody was trying to recreate Led Zeppelin until now with a band like Greta Van Fleet, who is severely overrated, at least in my opinion. If you never listened to Led Zeppelin, but now all of a sudden you listen to Greta Van Fleet and you're like, oh my god, why hasn't a band done this before? No, they already did. Greta Van Fleet is just a fucking tribute band to Led Zeppelin. But when looking at modern rock and modern metal music, without Van Halen, you do not have the current state of where we are in that sect of music. Because while Tony Iommi in the 60s, he was really good with his right hand. He was really good rhythmically, and he's considered the godfather of metal just due to the riffs that he created. He really wasn't that great of a soloist, but Eddie Van Halen was able to take his rhythmic ability and his solo ability, combine it to, he's just the perfect specimen of what you would want in a guitarist. He's got good rhythm, and he's got incredible chops when it comes to his solo playing. And without Eddie, you don't have like the modern speed metal or whatever. Like without Eddie Van Halen coming out of the like woodworks, I really don't see how a band like Metallica would come into existence. Like I don't care if it's a matter of oh, they weren't necessarily influenced by Van Halen. No, but they were, because without Eddie Van Halen, you're not playing with that tapping style and with that speed metal style. Like Eddie Van Halen truly revolutionized the way that modern rock and metal music is being played today. Oh, and you know what? Honestly, another segment idea based off of all of this is who do you think are some of the most influential bands or artists of all time? And you guys are all probably going to say the Beatles, so I don't really want to hear the Beatles. I actually have my own like issues with the Beatles. While I think the Beatles were fantastic for the era that they were in, I also don't think that they were nearly as influential as a group like the Rolling Stones, because the Beatles to me were just like they were pretty much just a pop band. Right? I mean, yes, musically, what they were able to achieve is insurmountable, but I think the Beatles, I don't want to say they're overrated. You can't say that they're overrated. But when it comes to the way that rock music has evolved, I don't really see how they were so influential in those terms, because you got songs like Help or I Want to Hold Your Hand. I'm like, these songs are fucking so stupid. Like in terms of rock music, I would say that the Rolling Stones are way more influential in that regard. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Because maybe it was also just the style of that era, right? Because those songs were kind of emulating off of Elvis, right? Like I Want to Hold Your Hand, Help. They kind of emulated songs like Hound Dog by Elvis. And even that was a cover. People don't realize that Hound Dog was not an original Elvis song. But I really don't think that the Beatles truly became like a quote unquote rock band until a little bit later on in their career as their music started to evolve a little bit. Whereas the Rolling Stones were just a little bit more like consistent with how they were. I mean, you got songs like I Can't Get No Satisfaction that came out in 1965, and then they put out Gimme Shelter in 1969. Like, I don't know, if we're talking straight rock music, I think those songs are a little bit more influential than a song like fucking Help. But then you also got a Beatles song like I Am the Walrus, which is a little bit more rock heavy. But again, I don't think that that song would have come out if it wasn't for I Can't Get No Satisfaction, because I Am the Walrus, I don't think came out until 1967. So without I Can't Get No Satisfaction and that like kind of more guitar-driven rock music, I don't think you have I Am the Walrus. So I don't know. I don't know. Do I have something here? Am I onto something, or am I just totally fucking crazy? But I think that the thing with the Beatles is they were really the first to kind of come out with like a new style of music. And I think that's what you see throughout the popularity of bands, right? Because it's something new to the listener. So when you're the first to kind of come out with something of that style, you're going to become super famous because people are going to be drawn to it. Like Metallica, I think they formed in 1981, but when Kill 'Em All came out in 83, everyone was hooked on this new speed style of metal because that's where it was garnering to. And also that explains like why Black Sabbath might have been super popular, because you had the psychedelic rock movement and Black Sabbath turned it heavier, so it was something new for them. Like, you just never know. Like, I think that the popularity of bands also comes out with the ingenuity of a band. So I think that we take the Beatles and we look at their ingenuity and we just amount that as their success because of all the album sales that they had, even though they're fucking, and I'm going to keep using this example because their fucking flops were also hits. I mean, I Want to Hold Your Hand is one of the dumbest fucking songs, and it's one of the biggest hits of all time. Now, I want to preface this. I'm not saying that all their songs were bad. I mean, Revolution, Come Together, Let It Be, like, they're all fucking fantastic songs. But it's not like the Beatles were even that great at their instruments. Like, it's well known that the Beatles were not masters of their instruments. They didn't get better at their instruments until later on in their career, once they started like honing it in. Like none of them were professional musicians. They just came out and were like, hey, we're going to do something new and exciting. We're going to show up with bowl cuts and who knows what's going to happen here. But on an instrument level too, the Rolling Stones were way better musicians. So that's also why I credit the Rolling Stones as being a little bit more influential than the Beatles. But again, I could all just be talking out of my ass and all of you could just totally disagree with me. But write in and let me know. So we got a couple segments. People who you think should hang it up. And then we also got artists or bands that you think are more influential than others. So write in and let me know your thoughts. And with that, I'm going to let you go. I hope you enjoyed this week's pod. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to write in, you know where to find me at lnbemedia@gmail.com. And if you like this episode, please share it with a friend. Give me that 5-star rating. Write up a review. And I'll catch up with you next Tuesday. Have a great week, everyone.